The bright light appeared in the night sky over Washington, D.C. without warning. At first, people thought it was a new star or maybe a satellite, but it grew larger each night. After a week, even the most skeptical had to admit it was a ship. An alien ship. The world held its breath. Military forces went on high alert. Religious leaders called for prayer. And scientists worked day and night to establish contact. Dr. Alice Franklin hadn't slept in 3 days. The bags under her eyes were dark, but her mind was sharp. As the top linguist at NASA's First Contact Division, she had prepared for this moment her entire career. She stared at her computer screen, watching the pattern of signals they had been receiving. "There's a logic to it," she muttered, taking another sip of cold coffee. "It's not random." Her assistant, Hall, nodded but said nothing. He was too nervous to speak. The signals had started coming in after Earth had sent its own welcome message, a series of mathematical sequences followed by basic information about human biology and culture. "They're responding to our math," Alice said finally. "They're using prime numbers as a foundation, then building more complex ideas." The next morning, Alice presented her findings to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the President. The room was tense, filled with military personnel and government officials. "We believe they're attempting peaceful communication," she explained. "They've sent us what appears to be their own biological information and cultural markers." Jack Garner, the military advisor selected to work with Alice, raised his hand. Unlike most of the generals in the room, Jack had a gentle demeanor. His voice was soft but clear. "Do we have any reason to believe they pose a threat?" he asked. Alice shook her head. "None so far. In fact, they seem eager to establish a shared language." 3 weeks later, the ship moved closer. It positioned itself in Earth's orbit, a massive structure that looked like a series of silver rings connected by glowing blue energy. Smaller vessels descended to the designated landing area, a wide field outside of Geneva, where the United Nations had prepared a welcome site. Alice and Jack stood at the front of the human delegation. Despite the cool breeze, Alice felt sweat running down her back. This was humanity's most important moment. The door of the alien vessel opened with a soft hiss. A tall, slender figure emerged. Its skin was almost transparent, with a gentle blue glow pulsing beneath the surface. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, not so different from a human, but more elegant somehow, more refined. The alien looked at the assembled humans, and then did something unexpected. It smiled, or at least, its face formed an expression that seemed like a smile. "We are the Vorex," it said in perfect English, its voice musical and light. "We have been studying your transmissions for some time." Alice gasped. They had already learned English. The alien continued, "I am Zil Nara, ambassador of the Vorex Collective. We come in peace and with great curiosity about your charming world." There was something in the way Zil Nara said charming that bothered Jack. It reminded him of how adults sometimes spoke to children. Over the next few weeks, more Vorex arrived. They established an embassy and began sharing some of their technology. Medical advances that could cure diseases, energy sources that were clean and efficient. But Jack noticed they always held something back. They would explain concepts but withhold specific details. "They're treating us like we're not ready," he told Alice one evening as they reviewed the day's meetings. Alice nodded slowly. "I've noticed that too. Zil Nara talks about humanity as if we're fascinating pets. Yesterday, she called our nuclear power a sweet early attempt at energy production." "They don't see us as equals," Jack said. "No," Alice agreed. "They think we're harmless, primitive. They have no idea what humans are capable of." And for now, both Alice and Jack thought, maybe that was for the best. 6 months after the Vorex arrived, the cultural exchange program began. The large white building with strange curved walls became the Vorex embassy in Geneva. Every day, humans lined up outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the aliens. Diane Powell packed her bags carefully. As a history professor from Boston University, she never imagined she would be chosen to visit an alien outpost. Yet here she was, one of 20 scholars selected to travel to Alpha Centauri. "Are you nervous?" asked Sam Carter, standing in her doorway. The cultural anthropologist had a kind face with laugh lines around his eyes. "Terrified," Diane admitted, "but excited too." The human delegation left Earth on a Vorex ship called the Stellar Harmony. The journey that would have taken humans decades using their best technology took only 11 days on the alien vessel. "How does it work?" Diane asked a Vorex engineer named Tevlon. The alien made that now familiar expression that humans had learned was their version of a smile. "It bends space," Tevlon explained slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Like folding a paper to bring 2 points together." Diane nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She had noticed that the Vorex often simplify their explanations for humans. The Alpha Centauri outpost was beautiful. It orbited the second planet in the system, a massive ring station with gardens, living quarters, and research facilities. The humans were given comfortable rooms and allowed to explore certain areas, at least. One morning, Sam tried to enter a research wing, but a door that had been opened the day before was now sealed. "I apologize," said the Vorex guide. "That section contains propulsion research unsuitable for sharing at this time." "Unsuitable?" Sam asked. "For developing species, certain technologies must be introduced gradually," the guide explained. "It is for your own protection." Later, Sam met Diane in the station's garden. Plants with blue and purple leaves created a peaceful setting. "They're restricting our access," he told her quietly. "I've been mapping the station. Almost a third of it is off-limits to us." Diane wasn't surprised. They've been doing the same with historical information. They want to learn about Earth's history, but they're selective about what they share of their own past. That evening, the Vorex hosted a dinner for the human delegation. The food was specially prepared to be safe for human consumption. It tasted strange, but not unpleasant. Ambassador Zilnera raised a glass filled with a glowing blue liquid. "To our charming human friends, your curiosity reminds us of our own youth as a species." The humans smiled politely, but many felt the sting of condescension. After dinner, Sam couldn't sleep. He wandered the corridors of the visitor section, thinking about the strange relationship developing between humans and the Vorex. They were helpful but distant, friendly but guarded. As he turned a corner, he heard voices coming from a room with a door slightly ajar. He recognized the musical tones of Vorex speech, now translated by the small device all humans carried. "The contradiction is puzzling," one voice said. "Their historical records show such violence, yet they present themselves as peaceful." Sam froze, listening carefully. "Perhaps they hide their true nature," another voice suggested. "The archival download is only 30% complete. We should reserve judgment until we have processed all their historical data. The survival patterns are most concerning. No other Category 3 species has endured what they call world wars and continued technological advancement." Sam leaned closer, but his foot made a sound against the floor. The voices stopped immediately. The door opened fully, revealing 2 Vorex scientists. Their skin pulsed with quicker light patterns than usual, a sign of surprise or alarm. The humans had learned. "Human Sam," one said smoothly. "Are you lost?" "The guest quarters are in the opposite direction." "I was just walking," Sam said. "Couldn't sleep. What were you discussing about human history?" The Vorex exchanged glances. Nothing important, merely cultural observations. But as Sam returned to his room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The Vorex were studying human history very carefully, and whatever they were finding was causing concern. Back on Earth, Lucy Bennett stared at her computer screen in the human Vorex liaison office. As a computer specialist, she had been monitoring data transfers between Earth and the Vorex systems. The patterns had shifted in the past week. "That's strange," she murmured, noting the categories of information being requested. Military history, survival accounts, Recovery from natural disasters. Lucy picked up her phone and called Dr. Franklin. Alice, I think you should see this. The Vorex are suddenly very interested in our wars. Alice Franklin met Lucy Bennett in a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the Vorex embassy. They chose this place because it had no cameras, and the noise of the coffee machines made it hard for anyone to listen in. Show me, Alice said, sliding into the booth. Lucy opened her laptop and turned it so Alice could see. Look at these data requests. Last month, they were downloading information about art, music, and science. Now it's all this. The screen showed lists of files. World War II documents, survival stories from natural disasters, accounts of human endurance in extreme conditions. They're specifically targeting information about how humans respond to threats. Lucy explained. Wars, famines, plagues, anything that almost wiped us out but didn't. Alice frowned. Could it be simple curiosity? Maybe this is just part of learning about us. Maybe, Lucy said. But why hide it? And why the sudden change in focus? Meanwhile, on the Alpha Centauri station, Sam Carter couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he had overheard. He decided to test a theory. During the cultural exchange session that day, when it was his turn to present, he chose an unexpected topic. Today I'd like to discuss human recovery patterns after near-extinction events, he announced. The room went completely silent. The Vorex delegates, usually relaxed and slightly bored during human presentations, suddenly became very still. Their skin stopped its gentle pulsing. Throughout our history, Sam continued calmly, humans have faced numerous threats to our survival as a species. The Black Death killed over half the population of Europe, yet we rebuilt. 2 world wars in the span of 30 years nearly destroyed our civilization, yet we created international cooperation systems afterward. He noticed that more Vorex had entered the room. They stood along the walls, watching him intently. Our adaptability in the face of threats is perhaps our defining characteristic as a species, Sam said. We don't just survive. We learn, adapt, and come back stronger. When he finished, there was no applause, just silence. Then Ambassador Zilnera stood up. A fascinating perspective, human Sam, she said. Her voice had lost some of its musical quality. It sounded flatter, more serious. We would be interested in discussing this aspect of human history further, perhaps in a more formal setting. That evening, Diane found Sam in his quarters, packing his bag. What are you doing? She asked. Getting ready, he replied without looking up. Something's changed, Diane. The way they looked at me today, it wasn't the same condescending interest. It was something else. Fear, Diane suggested. Sam paused. Maybe. Or respect. Either way, I think they've been underestimating us, and they're just starting to realize it. Back on Earth, the Vorex embassy called an emergency meeting with human leaders. For the first time, they requested that military officials be present. Jack Garner sat next to Alice, watching as Ambassador Zilnera entered the room. The aliens' movements were different, quicker, more precise, less flowing than before. Esteemed colleagues, Zilnera began. There was no mention of charming humans this time. The Vorex Collective wishes to deepen our understanding of human military and survival capabilities. The human representatives exchanged glances. We are particularly interested in your species' remarkable resilience in the face of extinction-level threats, Zilnera continued. This quality is unusual in our experience with other intelligent life forms. Why the sudden interest in our conflicts? General Rodriguez asked bluntly. Zilnera's skin pulsed rapidly before settling. Academic interest only, I assure you. We seek to understand all aspects of human culture. After the meeting, Jack pulled Alice aside. They're scared of something, he whispered. Did you notice how they kept asking about our recovery time after major conflicts? Alice nodded. Lucy's been tracking their data requests. They've downloaded almost every major war account in our history. But why? Jack wondered. What changed? That night, as Alice worked late in her office, her secure line rang. It was Sam, calling from Alpha Centauri. "Alice, I need to tell you something," his voice crackled over the connection. "I think I know why the Vorex suddenly care about our history. They've been classifying species, and something about us just changed our category." "What do you mean, classifying?" Alice asked. "The Vorex rank other species by threat level," Sam explained. "And I think humans just got upgraded." 3 weeks passed, and everyone noticed the change. The Vorex no longer walked with their flowing, relaxed movements. They moved with purpose now, their steps quicker and more alert. In meetings, they sat straighter and watched humans more carefully. Alice noticed it first during a technology exchange meeting. A Vorex scientist named Ventura was explaining their medical advances. "This device can heal bone fractures in minutes," Ventura said, showing a small silver tool. Yesterday, such a device would have been kept behind closed doors. Today, the Vorex offered to share it. Why the sudden generosity? Alice asked later, when she and Jack met for dinner. Jack picked at his food. "They invited me to a military briefing today. First time ever. They asked about our emergency response systems, how quickly we could mobilize in a crisis." Sam was right, Alice said quietly. Something changed their view of us. On the Alpha Centauri station, the atmosphere had shifted too. Vorex officials who once barely acknowledged the human delegates now sought them out for conversations. They asked detailed questions about Earth's history, especially about war heroes, survival stories, and recovery from disasters. Diane was surprised when a high-ranking Vorex official named Carvex requested a private meeting with her. "I would like to understand your World War I better," Carvex said when they met in a small conference room, particularly the human response known as the Manhattan Project. "The atomic bomb development?" Diane asked, surprised. Carvex's skin pulsed with rapid blue light. "Yes, your species went from basic flight to nuclear weapons in less than 50 years. This rate of adaptation is remarkable. It was a terrible time in our history," Diane explained. "We hope never to repeat it. Yet you survived it," Carvex pressed, and emerged with spaceflight shortly after. Later, Diane found Sam in the station's viewing area, looking out at the stars. "They asked me about the Manhattan Project today," she told him. Sam nodded. "They asked me about the Black Death and how European society rebuilt afterward. They're not treating us like children anymore." "No," Diane agreed. "Now they're treating us like something they need to understand better." Back on Earth, the Vorex embassy hosted a formal dinner. For the first time, they invited human military leaders and survival experts alongside the usual scientists and diplomats. Ambassador Zilnera stood to make a toast. Her skin pulsed with slow, measured light. "To our human friends," she said, raising a glass. There was no mention of charming or sweet this time. "We admire your resilience and your adaptability. These are qualities the Vorex value highly." Jack leaned over to Alice. "Did she just say admire? Last month it was all about how admirable our attempts at space travel were." Alice nodded slightly. "Listen to the words she's using now. Resilient, adaptable. Those aren't words you use for pets or children." After dinner, Zilnera approached Alice directly. The Vorex ambassador seemed less relaxed than usual. "Dr. Franklin," she said, "the Vorex High Command requests more information about human conflict resolution and survival strategies. We find these aspects of your species particularly noteworthy." "May I ask why the sudden interest?" Alice asked carefully. Zilnera hesitated. "Let us say that our understanding of humanity has evolved as we have studied your historical records." The next day, Lucy called Alice with urgent news. "Their download patterns have changed again," Lucy said, her voice tense. "Now they're focusing on human innovation during crisis. The Hoover Dam, the polio vaccine, the space race. Times when we made big leaps because we had to. They're trying to understand how we respond to pressure," Alice realized. That evening, a large Vorex ship arrived in Earth's orbit without warning. It was bigger than any they had seen before, with a different design, sleeker, with fewer lights. World leaders gathered in an emergency session. On screens around the room, they watched as a message came through from the Vorex High Command. After careful consideration of all available data, the message read, "The Vorex Collective has reassessed the status of humanity. We request an immediate council with your highest authorities regarding the terms of our continued relationship." The room fell silent. "What does that mean?" someone finally asked. Jack looked at Alice, his face grim. "It means they've been reading about our past," he said. "And now they're worried about their future." The garden room in the Vorex station was quiet except for the soft bubbling of a strange fountain. Sam and Diane sat at a small table with a Vorex diplomat named Kel Morrow. It was meant to be a formal dinner, but the atmosphere felt tense. Kel Morrow poured a bright red liquid into 3 glasses. "This is from your planet's grades. We find it interesting." Sam noticed that Kel Morrow had already emptied 1 glass. The Vorex seemed less controlled than usual, the light under its skin pulsing in uneven patterns. "May I ask you something directly?" Diane said after a few minutes of small talk. "Why has your attitude toward humans changed so much recently?" Kel Morrow's hand jerked slightly, spilling a few drops of wine. "Change? I'm not sure what you mean." 3 weeks ago, you treated us like children," Sam said. "Now you treat us like equals, or maybe something else." Kel Morrow stared at them for a long moment. Then it drank the entire glass of wine in one swallow. Wine affected the Vorex differently than it did humans. It didn't make them drunk exactly, but it seemed to loosen their usual rigid control. "You were not supposed to notice," Kel Morrow said finally. Its voice had lost the musical quality, becoming flatter. "Our assessment of your species has been adjusted." "How so?" Diane pressed gently. Kel Morrow's skin pulsed rapidly. "When we first discovered your transmissions, we classified Earth as a Category 3 civilization." "What does that mean?" Sam asked. "Category 3, intelligent but harmless, worth trading with but not threatening." Kel Morrow poured another glass of wine. "Only 17% of developing species reach Category 3 without self-destruction." "And now?" Diane asked. Kel Morrow's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "After studying your historical archives, the High Command has reclassified humans as Category 1. The room fell silent. Even the strange plants seemed to stop moving. "What's Category 1? Sam finally asked. "Extremely dangerous, potentially existential threats." Kel Morrow's skin had turned almost white, the blue glow barely visible. "In our 20,000 years of space exploration, we have only classified 2 other species as Category 1. We monitor them closely and limit their expansion." Diane and Sam exchanged worried glances. "Why?" Diane asked. "Humans aren't aggressive toward other species. We've been nothing but peaceful with the Vorex." "It is not about current aggression," Kel Morrow explained, leaning forward. "It is about potential and adaptability. Your species has survived events that would have ended most civilizations." Kel Morrow touched a small device on its wrist, and a hologram appeared above the table. It showed a timeline of human history, with red marks scattered throughout. "According to our calculations, your species has faced 17 near-extinction events," Kel Morrow said. "Ice ages, plagues, global wars. Each time, you not only survived but emerged stronger and more advanced." The hologram zoomed in on the 20th century. "This period particularly concerns the High Command," Kel Morrow continued. "In less than 100 years, you went from basic flight to landing on your moon. From simple radio to global information networks. From conventional weapons to nuclear arsenals that could destroy your entire planet." "That's progress," Sam argued. "Not a threat." "It is the speed that alarms us," Kel Morrow said. "No other known species adapts as quickly under pressure. When threatened, humans become extraordinarily innovative and unified. Kel Morrow pointed to another section of the hologram. And this quality you call spite. The willingness to endure great suffering to overcome an enemy. The ability to keep fighting when logic says to surrender. The Vorax leaned back, suddenly looking tired. The High Command believes that if humans ever felt truly threatened by another species, you would become unstoppable. On Earth, Alice and Jack sat in a secure room beneath the United Nations building. On screens around them, they could see the large Vorax ship still orbiting Earth. Military leaders from around the world watched anxiously as Ambassador Zilnera entered the room. The Vorax High Command has completed its assessment of humanity, Zilnera announced without greeting. Her voice was formal, without its usual musical quality. Based on our analysis of your historical records, we must adjust the terms of our relationship. Alice felt her stomach tighten. This was what Sam had warned about. What terms? The UN Secretary General asked cautiously. The Vorax Collective has determined that unrestricted human development presents a potential future risk, Zilnera stated. We wish to establish a framework for controlled technological advancement under Vorax guidance. The room erupted in angry murmurs. You want to limit our development? General Rodriguez asked, his voice sharp. Based on what? The emergency meeting lasted 3 days. Leaders from every country argued about how to respond to the Vorax ultimatum. Some wanted to accept their terms to gain access to their advanced technology. Others saw it as the beginning of human enslavement. They're afraid of us, Jack told the assembly on the 3rd day. That gives us some power in this situation. Alice nodded. The Vorax wouldn't make demands unless they believed humans could eventually challenge them. We need to use that to negotiate, not surrender. In a small side room, away from the main debate, a man named Peter Walsh sat quietly, listening to the arguments through a speaker. Peter was a low-ranking diplomat with a background in game theory. He had been invited almost by accident. His boss was sick, and Peter came in his place. While the generals and presidents argued, Peter made notes on a small pad. When there was a break in the meeting, he approached Alice. Dr. Franklin, I have an idea, but it's not what anyone is discussing in there. Alice looked tired. She hadn't slept in days. What kind of idea, Mr. Walsh? A different approach, Peter said. Not accepting their terms and not fighting them. Something else entirely. When the meeting resumed, Alice asked for Peter to be allowed to speak. There were some annoyed looks. Who was this junior diplomat? But she insisted. Peter stood at the podium, looking nervous but determined. The Vorax are afraid of us because they've been reading our history, he began. But they're only seeing part of the picture. They see our wars and survival, but not what those experiences taught us. He displayed a simple chart on the screen. They've classified us as dangerous because we adapt and survive. But they don't understand why we do those things or what we've learned from our past. They're making a decision based on incomplete information. Peter took a deep breath. I propose transparency. Instead of accepting their limitations or rejecting them outright, we invite the Vorax to fully experience human culture. Not just read about it, but feel it. The room was silent for a moment. Then General Rodriguez spoke up. You want to give them more access. They already think we're dangerous. No, Peter replied. I want them to understand us. The very qualities they fear, our resilience and adaptability, are what would make us valuable allies rather than threats. Meanwhile, on the Vorax station, Diane and Sam were being prepared for return to Earth. The cultural exchange program was ending early. We've learned so much from Kel Morrow, Diane told Sam as they packed. The Vorax aren't evil. They're cautious. They've seen civilizations destroy themselves or others. But they're wrong about humans, Sam said. Yes, we fought terrible wars, but we've also created art, music, and medicine. We've learned from our mistakes. Diane nodded. That's what we need to show them. Back on Earth, Peter's plan was taking shape. Instead of a formal response to the Vorex ultimatum, humanity would invite the Vorex leadership to a series of experiences on Earth. "We'll show them who we really are," Alice explained to Jack as they prepared. "Not just what we've survived, but why we survived it, and what we learned." The Vorex were confused by the invitation. They had expected either acceptance or defiance. This was neither. "What exactly are you proposing?" Ambassador Zilnera asked during a private meeting with Alice and Peter. "We want you to understand us better," Peter explained. "Before you decide our future, experience our past through our eyes." Zilnera's skin pulsed slowly. "The High Command has reviewed your historical data extensively." "Data isn't experience," Alice said. "You've read about our wars but haven't felt our grief. You've seen our recovery statistics but haven't witnessed our compassion." For several minutes, Zilnera was silent, the lights under her skin moving in complex patterns. Finally, she spoke. "The High Command will consider your proposal. But know this, if we determine that humanity represents a genuine threat to galactic stability, we will take action." As Zilnera left, Jack joined Alice and Peter. "Do you think they'll agree?" Jack asked. "They're scientists at heart," Alice said. "Curious. They won't be able to resist learning more." Peter nodded. "And once they truly understand us, they'll see that the very things that make us dangerous are the same things that would make us their best allies." "And if they don't?" Jack asked quietly. Alice looked out the window at the Vorex ship hovering in the sky. "Then at least we tried peace first," she said. "That's the most human thing we could do." For 2 weeks, the Vorex leaders traveled across Earth. Their journey began at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., where they walked in silence through the stark reminders of human cruelty. Alice watched their skin pulse with deep blue colors she had never seen before, colors of sadness, she realized. Next came Hiroshima, rebuilt from atomic destruction. The Vorex stood in the Peace Memorial Park, looking at photos of the devastation and the city that rose from the ashes. "You keep these memories alive," Zilnera said to Alice. "Why show your worst moments to future generations?" "So we remember the cost," Alice explained. "So we don't repeat our mistakes." They visited New Orleans, a city nearly destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, but rebuilt through determination. They toured refugee settlements where people who had lost everything still preserved their cultural songs and dances. At each stop, humans shared their stories, not from history books, but from personal experience. The Vorex heard from a woman who had survived genocide in Rwanda, a man who had rebuilt his home after a tsunami in Indonesia, and children who were using technology to solve local problems. Sam and Diane joined the tour when it reached the International Space Station. Through the window, they looked down at Earth together. "Your world has more waters than landmass," a Vorex scientist named Rolfen observed. "Yet you still fought over territories." "We fought," Sam acknowledged. "But we also learned to cooperate. This station was built by nations that were once enemies." As the tour continued, a change came over the Vorex. They asked different questions now, not just about survival and war, but about music, art, and family bonds. They spent hours in museums, not just studying human technology, but human creativity. "They're starting to understand," Alice told Jack one evening as they watched the Vorex listening to a children's choir in a small town in Kenya. "But will it be enough?" Jack wondered. The final meeting was set in an ancient amphitheater in Greece. Stone seats curved around a central stage where people had gathered to share ideas for thousands of years. The Vorex High Command sat in the front row. Humans from around the world filled the other seats. The air felt heavy with importance. A man walked slowly to the center of the stage. Greg Daniels had not been part of the original plan. He was a simple elementary school teacher from Kansas who had lost his leg saving students during a tornado. When Peter heard his story, he knew Greg needed to speak. Greg stood beneath the open sky, his artificial leg visible below his shorts. He looked at the Vorax for a long moment before speaking. "I understand why our history scares you," he began. His voice was soft, but carried across the silent crowd. "It sometimes scares us too. Humans have done terrible things to each other and to our planet." He took a step forward. "But that's not the whole story. The same determination that helps us survive also drives us to create, to heal, and to protect others." Greg gestured to his artificial leg. "I lost this saving my students from a collapsed building. I didn't think about it. I just acted. That's human too." The Vorax leaders watched him with unblinking eyes. "We don't ask you to trust us because we've been peaceful," Greg continued. "Trust us because we understand the cost of war better than anyone. We've paid that price too many times." He looked up at the stars, just becoming visible in the evening sky. "Out there, in the galaxy, we will face challenges we can't imagine. We would rather face them with you, as allies, than alone or as enemies." When Greg finished, there was complete silence. Then Ambassador Zilnera stood and walked to the center of the stage. Her skin pulsed with colors no human had seen before. "The Vorax Collective withdraws its previous terms," she announced. "We propose instead a new type of alliance, one between equals with complementary strengths." A collective breath of relief swept through the amphitheater. Later that night, Zilnera and Alice stood on the observation deck of the Vorax flagship, watching Earth from orbit. The blue planet glowed against the darkness of space. "We came expecting to find innocence," Zilnera admitted. "Instead, we found survivors." "Does that disappoint you?" Alice asked. Zilnera's skin pulsed with what Alice now recognized as the color of hope. "No," the ambassador said. "In this galaxy, survivors make the best allies. The challenges ahead will require both our strengths." The Vorax plan for the long term, cautious and measured. "Humans adapt quickly to the unexpected." "A good balance," Alice said. "Yes," Zilnera agreed. "Perhaps that is why your stories drew us to your world. Somehow, we sensed we needed you as much as you needed us."